Now, to group all of this stuff together, we've been talking about the cloud, we've been talking about connected cars, the automotive industry, everything, including healthcare today. To bring it all together, we've asked a panel of industry leaders to come along and have a little discussion. And we want to imagine what it's like, or to reimagine how your business is going to look in the digital world. And we've asked them to come along. And the moderator for this session is the Deputy CEO and a very good friend of ours, Nick Willits. Nick, welcome. Thanks, Nick.
Well, good morning. Good morning. What a fantastic keynote session so far. That last presentation from Rob, particularly inspiring because it touches all of us individually. Now, as Tony mentioned, we're now going to move on to talking about really what is the underpinning of so much of this digital world, of course, the communications industry, and what this means for many of the people in the audience here today as you transform and reimagine your business for this world. How you think about the change in operations and IT. Think about the content and services that you need to deliver differently. Think about the connectivity and what that means in terms of the new types of connectivity, not just the demand, but the new types of services and assurance you need around that. And of course, what you need from the supply chain to make that happen. Joining me is a very prestigious panel, some of whom are new to you, some of whom are very well known to us here at the forum. To start, Scott Olcott, who's CIO at Comcast. Scott drives and manages one of the largest IT budgets in the world, not just for a communications company, of course, but a content company as well. Prior to joining Comcast, Scott has built and managed multi-billion-dollar P&Ls around the world and been involved in one of Europe's largest IPOs, so he really understands the business as well. Next, somebody who really needs no introduction, but really does understand business, having grown one of the best-known suppliers in the industry from its small roots to being a multi-billion-dollar corporation today. Andrew Feinberg, CEO of Netcracker, who just last night won the TM Forum Business Agility Award as Netcracker expands beyond the communications industry for work it's done with a very large global logistics company. I'm also pleased to introduce Tony Guerin, who's Executive Vice President at TELUS. Tony's responsible for building out one of the most aggressive and impressive fiber rollouts in the world, putting fiber to the premise in many different locations. And prior to that role, Tony was responsible for a team of more than 5,000 looking after the customers, so he's been very close to the customer as well. Finally, somebody who we know very well here at the forum, Phil Jordan, Group CIO at Telefonica. Phil's consistently a top 100 CIO. He's been the most disruptive CIO, the most influential CIO. Prior to Telefonica with Vodafone for 12 years. And again, just last night won an award for O2 in the UK with their O2 Drive product, really demonstrating innovation as an operator. So, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for today's panel. Welcome, gentlemen. Well, you've had the privilege of watching all the keynotes this morning. You've probably got a few views on that, but I'm going to start out with one question to each of you. We keep talking about digital. We keep talking about being a digital provider. What is a digital provider? It seems to mean something different to everybody else. Phil, let's start with you.
Yeah, so good morning. I think we've heard a lot about being digital. I guess my view is there's no such provider that's not digital, or is not going to be in the future any provider of any service that's not fully digital. I think that's just in keeping up with consumer demand. But to simplify it really, I think we heard some IT trends from BMW, and we've heard other things this morning, but I think really just three basic things make up a digital player in any industry, and particularly in the telco sector. I think real time, the business model to be fast enough to work in real time, and the support systems to help you do that. Automation, I think it's a front office to back office challenge. There's no point being digital in the channel if you're not digital in the back office. Mm-hmm. And I think data driven. So having established real time and automation, you have to use the data as best you can to drive insight and to drive context and relevance to the customer. So I think those three things, to simplify a very broad subject, would be my three key characteristics.
Scott, would you agree with that?
Absolutely, and good morning, and hello up there. I'm going to go in a different direction and talk about trust and customer advocacy. I think the digital providers today have that. We heard a little bit about Net Promoter Score, market valuation, and multiples being very high for these digital providers. And I think that comes down to the trust as a customer advocate that these digital providers have brought. I think the consumer knows that that digital provider has their back when it's done ideally. And I think behind the scenes, these companies have mastered really the touch points of the end-to-end life cycle of the customer, whether it's creating identity or activating service or service fulfillment. And they've just made that work, and they've made it feel light and right. And for me, that's what this is about.
Andrew, would you agree?
I would, but I'll take it yet another angle at it. As I look at this, I think there's no such thing as one size fits all. Mm-hmm. And I certainly think it varies from industry to industry. But even as we look at a telco, or what we used to call a telco in the good old days, I think there's a big difference between B2B and B2C, for instance. Louis earlier said that he had 4 children who are very digital. I have 5. And if you ask my kids who our communication service provider is at any one of our homes, they would say it's Facebook, it's Apple, it's Google, it's Instagram. For TV, we have Apple TV and Netflix. Sometimes a generic TV, unidentified brand comes in, and that's what comes on when you actually turn on the TV. And none of them know that we have a house phone. So you look at that and you say, have we lost that battle in terms of being the truly digital service provider? The answer is no, not yet. But I think what we do in the B2C sector, and we'll talk more about this, is very different from the opportunity that exists to us for B2B. My kids don't need 5.9 reliability. They don't need to make sure that it's always on. They're oblivious to regulations. So I think it's a more complex issue, but I think certainly the same principles apply, but we have to understand what our end goal is and how we're going to get there first.
Okay. And Tony, a lot of your business is in B2B, of course. Would you agree with that? Is it now about the growth in that area?
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with anything my peers have just said. I think from a TELUS perspective, we're looking at two ways. What should the customer experience be? One, it's got to be consistent. It has to be fast and immediate. And it has to be accessible across whatever medium or device they choose. And from a business perspective, from a TELUS perspective, we're investing heavily on FTTP to support our wired and wireless broadband infrastructure. And we have to make that digitization pay back those huge investments. So we have to automate and streamline our business. Mm-hmm. We have to be able to resonate with customers that increasingly don't look at us in the way they used to. So for us, the big bet is get those benefit realizations, monetize these massive investments we're making in access infrastructure, and find ways to stay relevant and give customers the services and access to the services they need on a real-time basis.
So Scott, maybe just let me pick that up with you. Andrew talked about how the new generation of kids today are looking at that as, the brands into their home that they recognize, a Netflix, Apple, the sort of consumer device or the consumer content end. Comcast is in an interesting position in that. On one hand, you're enabling a lot of those companies to do very well. You're providing the connectivity. And at the same time, you're competing with them because you're a major content provider and creator as well. So
right.
how do you balance that? And where does that leave Comcast in that mix? Are you a brand that's going to be recognized, do you think, or do you become a utility?
No, we certainly intend to be the household brand, but I have kids too, and it resonates what I hear from Andrew. Look, we are the largest broadcasting and cable company in the world, and we also connect the most homes to the internet in the U.S. And in spite of those companies that you mentioned being ever present and mature, and their game is on, Comcast, in spite of being what some would call an incumbent, we grew video subscribers, 53,000 video subscribers in the first quarter. We're continuing to grow broadband as well. And we don't see it as a paradox. We have to go both ways and enable that whole ecosystem. We think, here we are in beautiful Nice, and where there are restaurants, there are more restaurants, and it creates a destination. We want that environment where there is ubiquitous content which is driving access, but we also intend to compete on the content side. We run the rights for the Olympics, for the Super Bowl, and we're reinventing navigation, simple language search, and we think it's really important to build that ecosystem so all the ships can go up. And I know Tony and I have a passion that it's not cool, but networks still matter, and we're still actually, we're investing in that as well. Fiber deep, DOCSIS, high-speed connections, all these models still require that boring level of connectivity that our kids have abstracted, right? So,
well, maybe not be sexy, but it's important.
It seems to still matter, yeah, absolutely.
It underpins the world today. So let's move on from that really to talking about some of the operations and IT that underpins much of that today. 3 of you on the panel are in CIO positions. You're charged with making it work. And we're talking a lot today about not just what's it going to be, but how do you actually do it. So Phil, maybe let me start with you. Telefónica's been on a huge journey in the last few years of simplification under your leadership. And it's a very, very tough battle, and we've talked about it many times. What do you see as the key challenges that you're facing looking forward? You've got some of the simplification behind you, but a long way to go, but a lot of new challenges coming down the pipe as well.
Well, the first challenge, I just want to reiterate what the panel said. We're in an industry that still has overwhelming demand for what we do.
Yeah.
We're right at the core of this digital ecosystem. You know, we're in an amazing position. We enable the digital world to really happen. So without understating the issues we have, the value chain issues, the disruption we face, you know, we should be proud of the industry we're in. This world becomes digital because of what we do, not despite us. So I think we should be very proud of that. But of course, transformation is happening and is key. Some of the challenges, I think, we started with having the business understand the need to challenge. It's very difficult to get a business that has been used to growing at double digits, is used to having high relative margins to recognize a crisis. And I think we've been very successful in, you know, partly because of macroeconomic crises in Europe, that as a business, I think we recognized we needed to change. Then I think we had the challenge of the business recognizing that IT is a strategic investment area for the business now. There's been a sort of a shift around a little bit in terms of our business, where network was always considered the core differentiator, and of course it's our number one asset.
Do you think that's, just let me interrupt you there, do you think that's universally agreed, that IT is more strategic now? Do you see that in your peer companies?
I don't know, but I think, you know, you've heard from many different businesses today that talk about a seamless omni-channel customer experience in digital channels, the use of data, providing real-time automated services in a very data-centric, customer-centric, data-centric way. Well, you've just talked about IT and processes in a business. So I think if businesses don't get that, they're probably not going to be around in a few years' time when we're sat here talking about it. So I'm not sure if it's ubiquitous, but it's certainly in our business, recognizing the network asset and recognizing the need to invest. And as Scott was saying, you know, we want to continue passing homes and continue creating a great network experience. But, you know, we also have to invest heavily in our core processes, in our core systems, because we need to be real-time and automated. So I think getting the business to recognize the challenge, getting the business to increase investment and recognize that it's a strategic investment area, and then all the real challenges of getting a business to change, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, we're doing 15 countries in parallel, major business-led transformation. You know, and the challenges are huge, but the good news is everybody recognizes the need. We're well on the journey. We simplified the company significantly. You know, we have half the numbers of systems we had 3 years ago. We have some countries that have 10% of the product in their catalog that they had 3 years ago. And we'll end this year with a third of our global customer base transformed onto new technology. So the challenges are huge, but recognizing the problem, making the investment, and then driving good quality business change, it's the same as any change process has ever been, I think.
Now, this demands a very different kind of leadership from CIOs, I think, today, because where IT in a lot of operators was a fairly siloed department for a long time, it's very striking if you look at most digital businesses today. Go and ask Netflix or Facebook who their IT department are. That's the guys who give you a laptop when you sign up, and that's what they do. IT is the business.
Yeah.
So for a CIO in a telco, moving that transition internally, moving the sort of mindset internally, that must be very tough. Scott, is that a challenge you're facing?
Never.
You're a lucky man.
You know, I'm not a career CIO, and that might be part of the trend. I'm an operations and commercial guy, and I think increasingly they want people who understand technology, but really the business processes and policies that can be enabled by technology. And I think if I'm an example, that might be a trend to some degree. I think, and a lot of that is because we need, frankly, less coding, development, and testing in the future. I think we need more configurable tools. Mr. Feinberg is next to me. I had his team in a couple of weeks ago, and it's interesting how, on the fly, you can say, hey, I want to make this change to the customer model. I want to be able to pay the bill for my mother who's out of my footprint. It instantly pops out in the product catalog, and then it instantly pops out in the rating engine and in the billing. No one has to write code. It's completely configurable. And then the questions in the business are not around IT projects, but it's around policy, it's around process, it's around workflows, and how to configure a tool like that. And so I think that's changing the nature of the role. Business people are going to have to become a little bit more technical. Yeah. Technical people are going to have to become a little more business, and we're going to have to work and play nice with great partners like Netcracker, for example.
And Tony, how's this affecting you in TELUS, looking at the fiber rollout you're doing and your role in TELUS? Is it shifting to more of a business role? Do you have to really understand the business as well?
Well, I'm a bit like Scott. I'm not actually the CIO, but I work very closely with our CIO and CTO because architecturally they need to define a framework that this mosaic is going to come together through. The catalyst for the changes is the FTTP rollout, because basically we see that as a massive opportunity for transformation, both in the customer experience we can provide, but also in how we organize our business. You know, we've gone, and Netcracker is a partner with us, and in a key element of our IT stack. And we've gone from a customer journey when they wanted to place an order through to waiting for that order to transition from order to facilities assignment, 4 days minimum, with a high degree of fallout, to then dispatch a truck roll that may or may not happen within 2 days of the customer requesting it, and then within half a day or 2 hours of an appointment, to now we can provision in minutes. Mm-hmm. And we've even, in one of our most recent community rollouts, kind of take order to fulfillment in the home within 5 hours. Okay. So we're rapidly shrinking the way we provide service and the information that we get as the order transitions through our business.
You're moving at more of a digital speed, we could call it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. So Andrew's very generously agreed to join us here today, but he's a brave man as well, because sitting on stage with 3 of your customers and giving them the opportunity to tell you what they would like is always going to be challenging. So I'm going to turn up now. They're all being very polite to each other so far, but it'd be great to see what really, we've talked about the dramatic shift in IT. You've talked about it being a much more configurable IT rather than a programmable IT, the shift to the business. What do you need from your suppliers? Because what's enabling this is companies like Netcracker who are putting the technology in place. If you're moving into more of a DevOps style of operation that you're describing, how is the relationship with the supplier changing? What does Andrew need to do differently to support that?
Well, first, I think the industry is moving, and I think certainly Netcracker and partners like that, I think are pulling the trend versus resisting it. And this is about co-locating teams, and it's also about building libraries of workflows and policies and processes that can be called by the tools that I think become assets really quickly. And I do think on the fly, having dedicated teams that can configure is critical. But before that, in order for these tools, when we had this demonstration with Andrew's team, they actually didn't need experts to go and kind of hack their own tools to stand up these on-the-fly use cases, because billions of dollars have been put in the industry into R&D and to creating these platforms. And we spoke about the cloud and we spoke about networking platforms, but I think what we're starting to see is service-enabling platforms that are eminently pre-configured and have actually reduced all of the workflows and policies and processes and use cases into sort of atomic level structure that can be aggregated in any way we want. I think there's been a lot of learning in the last 40 years about the business support systems and investments been made. I think we need more of that. What I want to see is more of these workflows and policies and processes to become standardized. And maybe that's my last comment. There's a lot of standards that came out of the TM Forum related to networking and platform. I'd like to see identity as a service. I would like to see activation as a service. I would like to see self-install as a service, and have more and more libraries of these policies and processes that we can pull and simply implement rather than design and configure each time.
Well, we'd like to see the same, so very happy to work with you on that.
Indeed.
Phil, what about you? What do you want from the supply chain? What's got to change?
Well, I want the things I always want, which I want great quality delivery at a good price first. And then, listen, I think we're trying to articulate a future of technology for our business, certainly IT, and we're trying to signal that by saying, actually, there's something beyond IT in Telefonica. The T part we think is commoditized. You know, virtualized cloud infrastructures we heard about. I think we believe the telco OS, the BSS, is a pure commodity in the future. We want it as a black box, the service orientated. And I have 6,000 people and 5,500 people work in the telco OS today. So if I'm going to move them close to the customer into something that we call i3, which is beyond IT, which is about integration, so integrating third-party services, innovation, getting back the innovation DNA that we had as an industry that we kind of lost, and information, data. So commoditizing the T and moving into 3 I's is the journey we're on. What I need from my partners is the steps that help me do that. So great suites of technology that are easy to integrate, that are easy to manage, that we can move our services and our effort away from the telco OS and into a much more clear digital architecture.
But I would look at it and say from the, I guess I'm called supplier, partner, vendor, you know, I've been called a lot worse than that. But I think it's easy for us to say what are our expectations of our partners. Mm-hmm. I think, and we're certainly changing and we're taking this feedback very seriously, and there's been a lot of, we've been on the transformational journey ourselves over the past few years, just simply as we looked at what our workforce looked like 5 years ago when we were all doing nice waterfall deliverables every once in a while, whereas now we have thousands of people trained in Agile and hundreds of people in DevOps, and we're moving the organization in that direction. But I think the bigger question, Nick, you keep focusing on CIOs, and you keep saying CIO. I think that's a term of a yesteryear. Mm-hmm. I think the reality is transformation is probably the biggest overused buzzword in this industry, and I would argue that up until now, what we used to call transformation was truly just a technology transformation.
Yeah.
Today, it's much, much more complex, much greater, and we're looking at complete cultural transformation, complete business transformation, complete fundamental evolution of thinking of what we're all about as service providers, with the technology as a significant enabler. So it's not enough to have the right CIO with the right vision. It's a prerequisite, but it's certainly not enough. What's most important is that you have the right communication, you have the right leadership from the very top, you have to have the board support, you have to have the organization understand that the way it's been doing business for the past 100 and something years is all of a sudden drastically over. And you do not have a lot of time to climb up the learning curve. You need to execute, and you need to execute very, very differently. And that today is missing in the industry by and large. I think we're getting there. I think and I think over the next few years, the companies that have been able to climb the learning curve of that cultural transformation will end up being consolidators and successful, and others will probably go away.
We're almost out of time, I'm afraid. It's been a long morning, but it's surprising how quickly time goes when we're chatting about this topic. I want to wrap up with some words of advice from each of you for the audience here. Andrew just started to touch on the pace of change, and it's not just about the CIO, which I wholeheartedly agree with. Each of you, though, has been through and is going through transformation projects. You're very experienced in driving these. What would be your top 3 things that the audience should leave here today and go do in the next year? What should they do differently, and what should they take away from this week when they return to the office next week? Tony, let's start with you.
I think you've got to have a clear vision of where you want to head. I think you've got to have extreme discipline within the organization to manage the current state and make room for the future state. And then I think you've got to move very, very fast.
Scott.
I think really think from the consumer out. User interface, user experience will be a great touchstone for what that vision should be. So that customer advocacy piece, I think, is key. I think resiliency is important. We don't have permission to transform the company if the trains aren't running on time. That whirlwind of incidences and outages and managing the current, it's really critical to get in control of the day-to-day and not let the noise run your transformation. So I think getting solid on delivery of day-to-day is critical in order to reinvent the future. And then last, I think open. No longer enterprise IT protected by guns in your data center, but thinking about open architecture, APIs, cloud services. It's really time to open the kimono and welcome others into the enterprise.
Andrew.
Well, customer centricity, certainly understand who your customer is, segment the customer verticals and tailor to those customers. That's very important. Understand and define the objectives properly for each of those segments. Again, there's no one size fits all when it comes to digital transformation. And finally, and arguably most importantly, have the right team. The world is radically different today, and we can learn reasonably fast, but without an influx of new talent and talent that understands how to drive the digitalization, we can't move fast enough.
Phil, you get the last word.
Yeah, difficult. I agree with those. I mean, I would just add two. I think simplify. I think we're massively over-complex, and standardize. I think through standardization comes agility, and it takes discipline, but we need it. So simplify and standardize.
Great advice from the panel there. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big round of applause to our panel today. Thank you. Now, that concludes this morning's keynote perspectives, but it's really just the start of the week ahead. Keynote speakers starting in the sessions, which will start a little later than planned at 12 o'clock today. So you've just got a few minutes to leave here and go to the sessions. Please make the opportunity this week to spend a good amount of time networking. TM Forum Live is all about the conversation, and there's nowhere better than to have that conversation on the expo floor and around many of the Catalyst projects. Thank you very much, and enjoy the week ahead.